10 murders, 10 mysteries, 10 lives taken, and no one ever caught. From the shadowed alleys of Paris to the lonely Nevada desert, the killers vanished without a trace. Who did it, and how? Tonight, the unsolved begins. The mysterious murder. In the alley Paris 2012, the streets of Montmartre were quiet that night, damp with the drizzle of early spring. Streetlights cast long golden reflections on cobblestones, and the cafes had long since closed, leaving only the faint hum of the city in the distance. At approximately 11:47 p.m., a passerby walking home along Rue de l'Abreuvoir stumbled across a horrifying scene. The body of a man slumped against the brick wall of a narrow alley, lifeless and cold. The victim was identified as Julien Moreau, 32 years old, a freelance photographer known for his nocturnal walks through the city, capturing images of Paris that no one else noticed. He was discovered wearing a dark coat and carrying his camera bag, the strap twisted around his arm. His face bore signs of trauma, but it was the precision of the injuries that shocked investigators. A single, deep stab wound to the chest, clean and deliberate, as though delivered by someone who knew exactly where to strike. Police quickly cordoned off the alley. The scene was small but telling. Cobblestones were wet, reflecting the orange streetlights. Trash cans overflowed along the narrow passage, and the faint scent of damp earth lingered. The body lay in a strange, almost staged position, one arm draped across the camera bag as if Julien had tried to shield it. There was no weapon, no bag snatched, no wallet missing, only the dead man, the rain, and the quiet city. Investigators immediately sought surveillance footage from nearby streets. Cameras along the main thoroughfares captured him walking earlier that evening, carrying his camera bag as usual. At 11:35, he was seen entering the alley alone. At 11:40, the camera nearest the end of the alley showed nothing but empty, wet pavement. 3 minutes later, his body was discovered by the passerby. In that brief interval, Julien had been killed, and the perpetrator had vanished without a trace. The autopsy revealed further mysteries. The wound to his chest was precise, clean, and fatal within seconds. Toxicology found nothing unusual. No drugs, no alcohol. He had been alert and aware when he entered the alley. Defensive wounds were minimal, suggesting he either did not struggle or knew the killer. There were no other injuries. It was as though someone had simply stepped into the alley, ended his life, and disappeared like a phantom. Police interviewed his friends, family, and colleagues. No one reported recent arguments, threats, or suspicious encounters. Julien was known as friendly, solitary, and meticulous about his night walks. He had no enemies, no known debts, and no history of dangerous encounters. The trail went cold. Almost immediately, the alley itself offered few clues. Footprints in the rain were smudged, indistinct, and ended abruptly at the curb. No fingerprints besides Julien's were found. No DNA, no signs that another person had been present beyond the fatal act. It was as though the killer had moved through the space without touching it at all, leaving only the body behind. Speculation ran rampant. Some theorized it was a crime of opportunity, a mugger whose attempt went wrong, but nothing had been taken, and the nature of the wound suggested premeditation rather than panic. Others proposed a personal motive, perhaps a long-hidden grudge. Yet police could find no connection, no suspicious contact in his life. Some officers quietly wondered if the killer had been trained, moving with an almost impossible precision, leaving no trace and striking in a split second. Months passed. The case dominated Parisian tabloids for weeks, then faded into cold files as no evidence surfaced. Local artists and photographers occasionally left flowers at the alley, a silent tribute to the man who captured the city at night. The alley retained its quiet menace, wet and reflective under the streetlights, a place where the memory of Julian Moreau lingered like a shadow. The official report reads simply, "Victim, Julian Moreau. Cause of death, single stab wound to chest. Weapon, unknown. Suspect, unidentified." But behind those words lies one of Paris's most perplexing unsolved murders. A man walking alone through the city, struck down in a narrow alley, his killer, leaving nothing but absence and mystery in their wake. Even today, Montmartre retains its charm for tourists, but locals know the story. The alley where Julian died is avoided after dark, whispered about in cafes and studios. The crime is a chilling reminder that even in a city of light and life, someone can vanish into shadow, leaving a life ended and a mystery unsolved. Japan, 2005. The Kyoto Expressway stretched through Chiba Prefecture like a silver vein, carrying cars and trucks toward the sleepless capital. On most nights the highway was alive with movement, but on October 17th the rain had driven traffic away, leaving the roads strangely deserted. At 11:42 p.m., an emergency call reached the police. A body was lying across the middle lane near exit 14. When patrol officers arrived, their headlights revealed the figure of a young woman sprawled on the wet asphalt, her beige coat soaked in rain and blood. She was already dead, her throat slashed with surgical precision. There was no weapon nearby, no bag, no phone, only silence, broken by the hiss of tires on the distant road. The victim was soon identified as 26-year-old Emi Takahashi, an office worker from Chiba City. She had left her office earlier that night, telling colleagues she was going straight home. Yet here she was, 6 kilometers away from the station she should have taken, lying lifeless on the highway. The police turned immediately to the network of cameras along the Kyoto Expressway, hoping for a clear explanation. The footage began simply enough. At 11:21, EMI was seen walking along the shoulder, her coat pulled tightly around her. At 11:26, she appeared again, this time glancing nervously over her shoulder, as though someone was following her. The frame showed no one. Then, at 11:29, she vanished. 3 minutes later, at 11:32, her body suddenly appeared in the middle of the lane. During that time, no vehicle had stopped, no person had entered the frame, and no sign of violence was captured. The investigators stared at the footage in disbelief. She had walked out of sight alive and returned into view already dead. The autopsy offered only more strangeness. The wound across her neck was clean, sharp, inflicted with a blade more like a scalpel than a knife. It was the kind of cut that suggested training, perhaps medical, perhaps military. Death had come in seconds. Toxicology found nothing unusual. Emi had no drugs or alcohol in her system. She had been sober, walking deliberately, until someone had taken her life in those missing 3 minutes. Detectives traced her last movements. At 10:15 p.m., she left her office in Chiba. Instead of taking her usual train home, she somehow reached the expressway. She did not own a car, and no taxi driver recalled picking her up. Friends said she had recently ended a relationship, but the former boyfriend was in Osaka that night, hundreds of kilometers away. Her colleagues described her as quiet, focused on her work, with no enemies. The more the police dug, the less they found. Theories spread quickly. Some believed a highway predator had struck, someone who knew the blind spots between cameras. Others thought EMI had been carrying something secret from her company, something worth killing for, but nothing in her files suggested it. A darker possibility was whispered, that the killer had somehow avoided the cameras entirely, moving unseen like a phantom. Specialists examined the footage frame by frame, finding no tampering, no gaps beyond the missing 3 minutes, and no sign of another presence. Ime was there, then she wasn't, then she was dead. Her family grieved publicly. Her parents placed flowers on the roadside, pleading for answers. Her colleagues held vigils, baffled by the absurdity of her end, but leads dried up quickly. The only physical clue at the scene was a faint smear of blood on the guardrail where she had last been seen alive. But it was her own blood, nothing more. No fingerprints, no fibers, no signs of another person. Months passed and the investigation grew colder. Detectives interviewed dozens of people, tracked every potential suspect, but no one could be tied to the crime. Without a weapon, without witnesses, and without a suspect, the case collapsed into silence. By the summer of 2006, it was officially declared unsolved. The file was labeled and shelved, though no one close to the case ever truly put it away in their minds. Truck drivers began avoiding the stretch of highway near exit 14. Some swore they had seen a young woman walking along the shoulder at night, only to watch her dissolve into mist. Others claimed to hear faint footsteps on the pavement when they stopped for fuel. The legend grew. The ghost of Iemai Takahashi haunted the road where her life had been stolen. The official record remains starkly minimal. Victim, Iemai Takahashi. Cause of death, exsanguination due to sharp force trauma. Suspect, none identified. Yet behind that line lies one of Japan's most haunting mysteries. A young woman walked into the night, disappeared for 3 minutes, and returned as a corpse. The truth of those lost minutes remains buried in the dark, where no camera, no witness, and no investigator has ever been able to reach. In the summer of 1998, a small unnamed island in the Aegean Sea became the center of one of Greece's most unsettling mysteries. The island was little more than a stretch of rocky coastline with a single villa, built decades earlier by a wealthy shipping magnate who rarely visited. Local fishermen sometimes stopped at its cove during storms, but no one lived there permanently. When a family of 4 arrived by ferry from Athens to spend a week at the villa, no one suspected their holiday would end in horror. The Papadakis family, Nikos, his wife Eleni, and their 2 children, ages 12 and 9, were seen boarding a small rented boat in the harbour of Naxos on July 12th. Witnesses remembered them looking cheerful, loaded with groceries, luggage, and toys for the children. The weather was clear. They told the harbour master they would return in a week. That was the last time anyone saw them alive. 7 days later, when the rental company received no word, a search was organized. The boat was found tied neatly at the island's small dock, swaying gently in the water. The villa door was unlocked. Inside, investigators encountered a scene that would haunt them for decades. All 4 members of the family lay dead. Nikos was in the living room, collapsed in an armchair with a deep wound across his chest. Eleni was on the kitchen floor, blood pooling beneath her head, struck down by a violent blow. The children were found in their beds, covered by blankets as though tucked in for sleep, but both had been strangled. There were no signs of forced entry. The windows were intact, the doors unbroken. The house was undisturbed, with groceries still on the counter and plates set on the table for a meal that was never eaten. The electricity had been cut. Panic spread quickly across the islands. How could an entire family be murdered in a place so remote with no sign of an intruder? Police scoured the villa for evidence. No fingerprints other than those of the victims were recovered. The murder weapons, blunt force for Eleni, a knife for Nikos, and bare hands for the children, were never found. Bloodstains were confined to the immediate areas where the bodies lay. There were no footprints outside, no tracks on the shore. The locals offered theories. Some whispered about bandits or smugglers using the island as a hideout, killing the family when they stumbled upon them. Others believed it was a targeted attack, perhaps tied to Nikos's business dealings in Athens. But when investigators interviewed his colleagues and partners, nothing suggested he was in debt or conflict. He ran a modest construction company, respected and ordinary. One detail unsettled detectives most: the children's beds. They had been carefully arranged, blankets pulled up to their chins, pillows straightened. Whoever killed them had taken the time to stage them as if asleep. It suggested not only control, but also a chilling intimacy, as though the murderer had wanted to erase the violence with a grotesque imitation of peace. The forensic timeline placed the murders on the third night of their stay. That meant the family lived 2 full days on the island before death came. But from where? No other boats were recorded docking during that time. The Coast Guard kept logs, and fishermen swore they saw nothing unusual. The only vessel confirmed was the family's own rental boat. The idea that someone could arrive, kill 4 people, and vanish without anyone noticing seemed impossible, yet the corpses told another story. The Greek media descended, calling it the island slaughter. Reporters pressed officials daily, demanding answers. Authorities, under pressure, floated several theories: a robbery gone wrong, a crime of passion, even the possibility that Nikos himself had killed his family before taking his own life. But this collapsed under scrutiny. His wound was too deep and positioned in a way he could not have inflicted. There were no defensive injuries on his hands. He was as much a victim as the others. Weeks passed, then months. No suspects emerged. The island itself became a cursed place in the public imagination. Tourists avoided it, fishermen kept their distance, and eventually the villa was abandoned, left to rot under the Aegean sun. The Papadakis relatives fought for years to have the case reopened, but new evidence never surfaced. The authorities quietly sealed the file as unsolved, though investigators admitted privately they had no idea how the killer reached the island, or how they had departed unseen. Stories grew around the tragedy. Locals spoke of strange lights on the island at night, or the echo of children's laughter carried over the waves. Some said the villa was haunted, that the family's spirits lingered because justice had never been done. Others believed the murders were not the work of any human at all, but part of a darker curse tied to the land itself. Decades later, the villa stands crumbling, its walls overgrown with ivy, its windows shattered by storms. No one has lived there since. The dock is half sunken, the boards rotten, the paint peeling away. Travelers sometimes sail close enough to glimpse it, a shadow on the horizon, before turning back. The few who dared to set foot on the island reported a crushing silence, as though the earth itself was holding its breath. The official record remains a puzzle, for lives ended in isolation, in a locked world where no killer was ever seen. A family went on holiday and was wiped out, their deaths staged with eerie calm. To this day, The Papadakis case remains one of Greece's darkest mysteries, a story without an ending, a crime without a criminal, and an island that seems determined to keep its secrets buried beneath the salt and stone of the Aegean Sea. The man on the last train car, New York City, never sleeps. But in the small hours of a winter night, even the subway grows quiet. On February 19, 2017, the number 2 train rattled its way through the Bronx, mostly empty except for a handful of weary passengers. At 1:13 a.m., when the train pulled into the 241st Street station, the conductor walked through to clear the cars. In the last car, he found a man slumped in his seat, head bowed as though asleep. But when he tried to wake him, the man slid sideways, collapsing onto the floor. A spreading pool of blood told the truth. He was dead, killed by a single stab wound to the chest. The victim was quickly identified as Anthony Russo, 34 years old, a warehouse supervisor from Yonkers. He had boarded the train earlier that night at Times Square, alone. Surveillance footage showed him stepping into the final car at 12:42 a.m. Hands in his pockets, shoulders hunched against the cold. No one else followed him inside. For the next half hour, cameras at various stations captured the train pulling in and out, doors opening and closing, passengers entering and exiting the other cars. But in the last car, Anthony remained by himself by the time the conductor found him dead. The blood on his clothes had already dried. The medical examiner determined he had died at least 20 minutes earlier. The wound was sharp and deliberate, piercing the heart. But the murder weapon was gone. Police scoured the car for evidence. There were no fingerprints other than Anthony's own. No DNA, no signs of a struggle. His wallet and phone were still in his pocket, untouched. The car was clean, too clean, as though the killer had never been there at all. Yet Anthony, clearly, had not stabbed himself. The angle and force of the wound made that impossible. Detectives interviewed other passengers from that night. None reported seeing anyone enter or exit the last car after Anthony. Conductors confirmed they had walked through earlier stops, glancing inside, and seen only him. One woman remembered peering in and thinking he looked half asleep. Another passenger swore she saw him staring out the window at 181st Street, alive and motionless. No one saw a killer. No one heard a sound. The case baffled the NYPD. Cameras covered nearly every angle of the platform and the train. If someone had entered that car, they should have been visible. But the video showed nothing. Anthony went in alone and was later found dead. Detectives turned to his personal life. Anthony had no criminal record, no gang ties, no debts. He was engaged to be married the following spring, and his fiancée described him as steady and kind. He rarely stayed out late, and the night of his death, he had gone into Manhattan to meet a friend for drinks. That friend confirmed leaving him at Times Square, where Anthony said he would take the 2 train home. Everything appeared normal. Theories began to swirl. Some believed a passenger had slipped in unnoticed, hidden until the moment of attack. But where had they gone afterward? No cameras showed anyone leaving the car. Others speculated that the killer had boarded earlier, disguised as a transit worker or hiding in the darkened corners between cars. Yet there were no footprints, no evidence of another person's presence. The tabloids seized on the story, dubbing it the Phantom of the Subway. Headlines asked how a man could be stabbed to death in the heart of New York's transit system, without a single witness. Rumors spread of a ghostly figure stalking the underground, striking in silence before vanishing into the tunnels privately. Investigators admitted their frustration. They could not explain how the murder had happened. The timing, the surveillance gaps, the absence of physical evidence, every angle led to a wall. One detective was quoted anonymously saying, "It's like the killer evaporated into thin air." Months passed, leads went nowhere. Some officers quietly suspected that Anthony might have been targeted by someone close to him. A carefully planned execution carried out in the one place cameras could be blind. But there was no suspect, no motive, nothing that fit. By the end of 2017, the case was officially suspended, labeled unsolved. The story lingered in the city's collective memory. Subway riders whispered about the last car of the 2 train, avoiding it late at night. Conductors said they sometimes felt uneasy, walking through as though someone were watching from the empty seats. A few claimed to hear faint footsteps when the car was deserted. Anthony's family never found peace. His fiancée left flowers at the 241st Street station every year, a quiet memorial to a life cut short without reason. His parents pleaded for the case to be reopened, but there was never enough to go on. The official report remains chillingly simple. Victim, Anthony Russo. Cause of death, stab wound to chest. Suspect, unknown. Yet behind those words lies one of New York's most inexplicable crimes, a man who entered a subway car alone and never came out alive. His killer, invisible to every eye and every camera till this day. The last car of the train carries its passengers through the night, rattling north and south beneath the city. Most never think of Anthony Russo, but some who know the story glance at the empty seats and wonder. In the silence between stations, in the echo of steel wheels on tracks, they feel the weight of a mystery unsolved, and the lingering presence of a crime that should have been impossible. The birthday party murdered Berlin, 2003. It was the kind of winter night meant for celebration. On February 8th, friends gathered in a modest apartment in Kreuzberg to celebrate the 29th birthday of Matthias Keller, a graphic designer known for his easy laugh and love of music. The group was close-knit, 15 people in total, colleagues and childhood friends. They filled the apartment with chatter and cigarette smoke, crowded around the kitchen table with bottles of beer and cheap wine. Someone brought a stereo, someone else baked a cake. It was a night of warmth against the cold outside. By 3 a.m, the party was winding down. Some guests had passed out on the couch. Others were still talking loudly in the living room. Matthias was last seen heading toward the kitchen, smiling, humming along to the radio. No one thought anything of it. When morning came, the laughter was gone. A guest who rose early to get water walked into the kitchen and found Matthias lying. On the floor, his body was cold, a dark pool of blood spreading from a wound in his abdomen. He had been stabbed once, deep enough to kill him within minutes. The knife was missing. Panic erupted. Police arrived quickly, sealing off the apartment. They interviewed the 14 remaining guests, none of whom admitted seeing or hearing anything unusual. Everyone swore they had stayed in the living room. After Matthias left for the kitchen, no shouts, no sound of a struggle, no sign of an intruder. The front door was locked, the windows shut. The only people inside had been friends. Detectives expected the killer would reveal themselves under pressure, but interrogation led nowhere. All guests denied involvement, and there was no clear motive. Matthias had no enemies in the group. He was the host, the reason they were gathered. The possibility that one of them had slipped away unnoticed, stabbed him, and returned as though nothing happened seemed unbelievable, But it was the only option. The forensic team combed the scene. No fingerprints beyond the residence and known guests were found. No trace DNA, no fibers. The murder weapon was never recovered. The wound suggested a kitchen knife, but none from Matthias's drawers were missing. Whoever had killed him had taken the blade with them, slipping it past police and neighbors alike. In the days that followed, detectives replayed the timeline again and again. Between 2:45 and 3:15, Matthias went to the kitchen, and by morning he was dead. The apartment had remained sealed, no strangers entering or leaving. 15 people were inside when he was alive. 15 were inside when his body was found. The German press dubbed it Das Geburtstagsrätsel, the birthday riddle. Papers speculated wildly. Was it a drunken quarrel, hidden by a pact of silence? A jealous lover no one knew about? Some guests whispered that Matthias had been keeping secret debts. An affair, but no proof emerged. Investigators attempted to break the wall of silence with psychological tactics. They staged confrontations, separating the guests, hoping someone would crack. No one did. Each insisted they knew nothing, each repeating the same story. Matthias went to the kitchen, and they never saw him again until morning. One disturbing detail came from the medical examiner. The depth and precision of the stab wound suggested the killer struck quickly, deliberately, perhaps even with experience. This was not a clumsy, drunken act. It was calculated. The blow pierced his heart directly, yet no one admitted hearing a cry. Did Matthias know his killer? Did he allow them close, unaware of their intent? As weeks turned into months, suspicion began to poison the friendships. Guests accused one another. Friendships fractured. Jobs were lost. Some moved away from Berlin, unable to live under the shadow of the case. Still, police could not charge anyone. Without evidence, it was impossible. The case file grew thick with interviews, sketches of the kitchen, photos of the blood-stained tiles. Every avenue ended in silence. In 2004, the investigation was suspended, unresolved. To this day, no one has been arrested. What lingers is the unbearable strangeness. A man was killed in his own apartment during his own birthday party, surrounded by friends, with no chance for an intruder. 15 people were present, and yet no one saw the crime. The apartment has since been rented to new tenants. They know little of the story, though neighbors still recall the night of flashing police lights and hushed rumors. Those who once celebrated with Matthias rarely speak to one another anymore. The bond that held them was destroyed by suspicion. The official report is stark. Victim, Matthias Keller. Cause of death, single stab wound to chest. Weapon, unidentified. Suspect, none. But behind the words lies an unanswered question that still haunts Berlin, in a crowded apartment, in the middle of a party. How does a man die alone in his kitchen? And how does his killer vanish among his friends? The woman on the bridge in London, 1994. The Thames flowed dark and silent under the dim streetlights of Hammersmith Bridge. February nights were long and bitter, and the city seemed to hold its breath. On the evening of February 21st, a passerby walking along the embankment noticed a figure standing near the railing. At first, she appeared to be a solitary woman, shivering in the wind, her coat tightly wrapped around her. Then, as the observer approached, she realized the woman was already dead. The body was later identified as Catherine Moore, 31 years old, a bank employee living in West London. Her neck bore marks of strangulation, brutal, precise, leaving no doubt that she had been murdered. What puzzled investigators immediately was how she came to be there. CCTV cameras monitored much of the bridge and surrounding roads, but none had captured anyone approaching or leaving her side. In fact, footage showed her walking along the sidewalk alone just minutes before her death. When she was found, there was no one nearby. Detectives arrived quickly. The area was cordoned off, officers shining flashlights over the frozen riverbank below. The tide had risen slightly, erasing any potential footprints or traces. Catherine's handbag was lying intact on the pavement, her wallet inside. She had no phone on her. There was no sign of a struggle in the nearby vicinity. The railing where she had stood showed no scratches, no fibers, nothing. Forensic examination revealed further oddities. Catherine's death was estimated to have occurred around 10:47 p.m., a mere 7 minutes after she was last seen on camera. The marks on her neck suggested a struggle, but mine are a brief but deadly encounter. The killer's hands left no trace, no fingerprints, no DNA. Whoever had killed her had done so with astonishing efficiency, and then disappeared into the night. Investigators quickly ruled out suicide. The marks indicated manual strangulation, something Catherine could not have done to herself. And yet, there was no way the perpetrator could have left the scene without being captured by the camera's or so it seemed. Catherine's life offered no obvious motive. She worked in banking, had no enemies at work, and her friends described her as cautious, private, and careful. She lived alone in a modest flat in Hammersmith, and her routines were predictable. That evening, she had left work later than usual, taking a shortcut along the river to save time. The killer had waited for her, or had she simply encountered them by chance? No one knew. The press sensationalized the case immediately. Newspapers ran headlines like "The Vanishing Killer of Hammersmith" and "The Shadow on the Bridge." Rumors circulated that Catherine's murder was part of a series targeting lone women along the Thames, though no other similar murders could be confirmed. Locals were unnerved. Women avoided the bridge after dark, and even the police patrolled the area more frequently, though no further incidents occurred. Investigators pursued multiple leads. They questioned Catherine's co-workers, acquaintances, and neighbors. They combed through criminal records, looking for a pattern, a man with a history of attacking lone women at night. Nothing matched. The murder weapon, if any, was absent. The killer had used only their hands, leaving nothing but the fatal marks. Time only deepened the mystery. Months passed without progress. CCTV footage was reanalyzed, audio recordings checked, witness statements reviewed. All confirmed the same chilling fact. Catherine had been alone. No one approached her, no one left with her. Her murderer had acted in silence and vanished without a trace. The case left an indelible mark on the city. Hammersmith Bridge became associated with the unsolved crime. Pedestrians reported a strange feeling of unease when passing that stretch of pavement at night, and the river, dark and flowing, seemed to reflect the fear that lingered above it. Friends and family of Catherine Moore remained devastated, visiting her flat and leaving flowers along the embankment, hoping that somehow justice would be served. Officially, the case remains unsolved. The police record is stark. Victim, Catherine Moore. Cause of death, manual strangulation. Suspect, unknown. But in the minds of those who remember, it is far more than a line in a file. It is the story of a woman walking alone, disappearing in the space between surveillance and silence, only to be found dead minutes later. and of a killer who never existed in any camera's view, yet left a life behind in tatters, even decades later. The bridge carries its traffic and pedestrians as usual, unaware of the tragedy that took place on that February night. But for Catherine Moore, the world stopped in the shadow of the streetlights, her murderer remaining as elusive as the dark waters below, leaving London with one of its most haunting unsolved crimes. The Locked Apartment Murder Masco, 2010. Winter had its iron grip on the city, and the streets of the Northern District were slick with ice, the wind cutting through layers of coats. On the evening of January 14th, police received a call from a concerned neighbor reporting that a young woman hadn't been seen in days. When officers arrived at apartment 45B in a mid-rise building on Leninsky Prospect, the door was locked from the inside, the windows barred with metal grates. Inside, they discovered a scene that would become one of the most baffling mysteries in the city's recent history. The victim was identified as Irina Petrova, 28 years old, an IT specialist working for a private software firm. She lived alone, was known for her quiet demeanor, and had no reported enemies. On first glance, everything in the apartment appeared normal: clothes folded on shelves, dishes in the sink, a laptop left open on the dining table. But then they found her body in the living room, slumped against the sofa, her neck marked with the telltale bruising of strangulation. The room was undisturbed, no sign of a struggle. What struck the investigators immediately was the locked apartment. Every door was secured from the inside, the windows tightly latched. Metal bars on the lower level windows made entry from outside nearly impossible. There were no signs of tampering. It was, by every measure, a locked-room murder crime that had taken place in a space with no apparent way in or out. The forensic team combed the apartment meticulously. No fingerprints were found except Irina's own. No hair, no fibers, no traces of anyone else. The cause of death was clear: manual strangulation. The time of death was estimated to be the night of January 12th, just after 11 p.m. Beyond that, the crime scene offered nothing. Whoever had killed her had left no trace. Investigators questioned neighbors. One elderly woman claimed to have heard a muffled noise around midnight, a thump, maybe a chair falling. Another swore she saw a shadow through the frosted glass in the hallway, but by the time she peered closer, the apartment seemed empty. Surveillance cameras in the corridor had been disabled that night, though no explanation could be found for the outage. Irina's background provided no clues. She had no reported conflicts at work, no disputes with family, no visible debts or relationships that might motivate someone to kill her. She kept to herself, often spending evenings coding or watching films. Her life appeared ordinary, too ordinary, perhaps, to explain such an extraordinary crime. Police speculated on possible scenarios. Could a friend or acquaintance have been invited in and then escaped unnoticed? But any such person would have had to leave without opening doors or windows, without leaving any evidence of passage. Could it have been a professional, someone trained to move silently and cleanly, perhaps? But the lack of tools, the absence of any weapon left behind, and the untouched apartment made even that theory difficult to reconcile with reality. The media seized upon the story. Headlines in Russian tabloids called it the invisible killer of Leninsky Prospect. Commentators speculated wildly, some suggesting that Irina had been targeted for reasons unknown, others hinting at a criminal with supernatural stealth. Neighbors whispered about seeing lights flicker in her apartment at odd hours, though no one dared to enter the building themselves. Months of investigation yielded nothing. Every lead failed. Security logs, visitor records, background checks came up blank. Friends and colleagues were interrogated and cleared. Police even brought in locksmiths and engineers to examine the locks and windows, confirming there was no hidden passage or way for anyone to enter or leave unnoticed. Yet Irina was dead, and the killer had vanished as if they had never existed. The case began to take a psychological toll on those involved. Detectives complained of unease when visiting the building. Some described a feeling of being watched. Irina's family lived in quiet terror, unable to comprehend how such a crime could happen in a city as surveilled as Moscow. They left flowers at the building's entrance and prayed for answers that never came. The official record is sparse. Victim, Irina Petrova. Cause of death, manual strangulation. Weapon, none recovered. Suspect, unknown. But behind those words lies an enigma that refuses resolution. A young woman, living alone in a secure apartment, is murdered. No one enters, no one leaves, and yet she dies violently. Her life ended without reason or trace of the perpetrator. Years later, the building at Leninsky Prospect remains occupied, but the apartment is said to carry an air of dread. Tenants speak in hushed tones about strange sounds at night, about lights flickering behind the frosted glass. Irina's murder is remembered as one of Moscow's most haunting unsolved cases, a locked room crime that defies explanation. Theories continue to circulate: a professional hit, an intruder of extraordinary skill, even the impossible suggestion of something beyond human. But the truth remains inaccessible. Confined to the night when Irina Petrova's ordinary life was extinguished within four walls, she should have been safe. And in that quiet apartment, the evidence remains as it was, frozen in time. A body, a locked room, and a mystery that refuses to be solved. The death in the snowy forest, Sweden, 1986. Winter in the north is merciless. With days so short that twilight feels permanent and nights so long they swallow everything. On January 17th, a hunter discovered a body partially buried under fresh snow. In the dense forests outside Lulu, the ground was untouched except for faint, scattered footprints that led to the scene and then abruptly vanished. It was the kind of discovery that froze the blood. Even for someone accustomed to isolation and the harsh northern wilderness. The victim was identified as Lars Johnson, 29 years old, a forestry worker who spent most of his days managing timberlands in the region. He was known for his quiet demeanor and deep knowledge of the forest. He often worked alone and was comfortable navigating miles of wilderness without another soul nearby. His death, however, suggested that even the most seasoned woodsman could be vulnerable. Lars had been shot once in the chest at close range. The wound was fatal, the caliber of the bullet small but precise, indicating that the killer had known what they were doing. Strangely, no weapon was found at the scene, no rifle, no pistol, nothing. Blood had soaked the snow in a wide circle around him, yet the snow beyond remained untouched. It was as if the act had occurred in a perfectly isolated bubble, leaving the forest outside undisturbed. The footprints puzzled investigators. They were small, partially obscured by drifting snow, and appeared to lead to the clearing where Lars was found. But there were no tracks leaving the scene, no marks indicating that anyone had departed. It was as if the killer had simply disappeared into thin air. Even the harsh, frigid air of northern Sweden, which preserved tracks longer than almost anywhere else, could not provide a path of escape. Police canvassed the surrounding area. They questioned local residents, fellow forestry workers, and anyone who might have seen Lars before his death. Witnesses reported seeing him drive to the forest early that morning in his pickup truck, as he did every day. One hunter saw him around 9 a.m., walking toward the clearing with tools slung over his shoulder. That was the last confirmed sighting. Between 9 a.m. and 11:30 a.m., when the body was discovered, Lars vanished. No one saw another person enter. The forest and the pickup truck remained parked exactly where it had been left. The media dubbed it the Forest Phantom. Local newspapers speculated that Lars had stumbled upon poachers, or perhaps someone had personal grudges against him. But nothing in his background suggested enemies. He was not married, had few close friends, and led a solitary but uncomplicated life. Even the poacher theory failed. No illegal hunting activity was reported in the area, and investigators found no evidence of a struggle or traces of a weapon. Forensic analysis suggested the shot had been fired from very close range, possibly less than a meter away. Lars showed no signs of defensive wounds, indicating that he either knew his killer or had been caught completely off guard. The forest itself offered few hiding places in the clearing where he fell, and snow cover would have made approaching silently difficult. Whoever killed him had done so with a combination of stealth, precision, and extraordinary timing. Weeks of investigation yielded no new leads. Police re-examined the footprints, measuring them, comparing them to known locals, even to military recruits from nearby bases. Nothing matched. The gun was never found, nor any casings, nor any traces of the person responsible. The forest was searched again and again, but it revealed nothing beyond Lars himself and the unbroken snow around him. Years later, locals still avoided that part of the forest. Hunters reported an uneasy feeling, as though someone or something was watching. Some swore they heard footsteps in areas where no one could possibly walk, echoes of the past mingling with the wind. The clearing where Lars was found remained a silent, frozen monument to a crime that had no explanation. The official police record is stark. Victim, Lars Johnson. Cause of death, gunshot wound to chest. Suspect, unknown. Weapon, not recovered. But behind the brief lines lies one of Sweden's most perplexing unsolved murders. A man walking alone in a familiar forest, struck down with lethal precision, leaving no trace of the killer or their escape. The forest regrows each year, snow covering the ground and leaves filling the trees. But the memory of Lars Johnson's death persists, whispered among those who know the story. It is a reminder that even the most isolated and familiar places can conceal dangers that cannot be explained, and that some mysteries, no matter how thoroughly searched, remain forever unsolved. The Vanishing at the Riverside Warehouse, Chicago, 2011. The banks of the Chicago River had long been lined with warehouses, most abandoned or repurposed into lofts and offices. On the night of June 8th, a security guard patrolling one such building near Goose Island noticed something odd. The main entrance, usually locked and sealed, was slightly ajar. He radioed the company and entered cautiously. What he found inside would baffle investigators for years. The warehouse was vast and dark, filled with empty crates and machinery left over from a manufacturing company long gone. In the center of the main floor, a young man's jacket lay crumpled. On the concrete, wet with what appeared to be blood. There was no body, no one, just the jacket. The missing man was soon identified as David Herrera, 27, a warehouse worker and aspiring musician who had taken the night shift to earn extra money. His co-workers reported that he had arrived at 10:30 p.m., clocked in, and then disappeared around 11:15 p.m. roughly 45 minutes before the guard discovered the scene. Security footage from the street-level cameras showed him entering the warehouse, alone, and the doors locking automatically behind him. After that, he vanished. Police arrived within minutes. The scene was surreal. No footprints beyond David's, no signs of forced entry, no struggle. The concrete floors were clean except for the faint smear of blood near the jacket. The warehouses, rear doors, emergency exits, and windows were all locked or barred, consistent with building codes. Any path for someone to remove a body should have left evidence. Yet when investigators scoured the building and surrounding area, there was none. No prints, no tire tracks, no discarded objects. David Herrera had disappeared as completely as if the earth had swallowed him whole. Colleagues and friends described him as careful, dependable, and cautious. He had no known enemies, no debts, no conflicts at work. Surveillance from nearby streets showed no unusual activity. Delivery trucks passed regularly, pedestrians walked past, but no one saw anyone leave. The warehouse with him? The question became immediate. How do you vanish inside a building where every exit was accounted for and monitored? The press called it the Chicago warehouse mystery, speculating on kidnappings, human trafficking, or even elaborate pranks. Gone wrong, the security company examined their systems. Nothing was malfunctioning. Cameras had captured no sign of entry or exit beyond the footage of David arriving. He had simply walked into the warehouse and walked out of existence. Forensic teams found nothing in the warehouse that could suggest how someone might have been taken. No ropes, no chains, no secret compartments, no ventilation shafts, large enough to hold a person. The small pool of blood indicated he might have been injured, but not fatally. If anyone else had been involved, they had left no trace at all. It was as if the vanishing had been executed with surgical precision. Authorities investigated David's personal life thoroughly. Friends reported he had been dating a woman for over a year, but she was cleared immediately. His family was cooperative, providing alibis for everyone he was known to have met. He had no history of leaving abruptly, no plans to disappear voluntarily. Yet, after that night, he was gone. The investigation treated him as a likely homicide victim. Though without a body or suspect, charges could never be filed. Months passed. Police dredged the river nearby, checked abandoned properties, and interrogated transient workers in the area. Nothing. The trail led only to the warehouse floor, where his jacket remained, a silent witness to a disappearance that defied explanation. Every theory, kidnapping, voluntary disappearance, criminal abduction, failed to fit the facts. There was no motive, no suspect, no evidence. Locals whispered about strange occurrences at the warehouse before the incident. Lights flickering, in empty rooms, muffled sounds at night, the feeling of being watched. Security guards reported unease, claiming they sometimes saw shadows or movement in areas supposedly empty. But these stories, anecdotal and unverifiable, only added to the building's mystique. The case became a cold file in the Chicago Police Department, but it never lost its place in the city's collective imagination. The warehouse, once a hub of industry, now sat largely abandoned. A small plaque outside commemorated the mystery, warning urban explorers that some doors, once opened, may lead to nowhere. The official police record reads simply, victim, David Herrera. Incident, disappearance. Location, Riverside Warehouse, Goose Island. Suspect, unknown. Yet behind those sparse lines lies one of the city's most baffling crimes. A man enters a monitored building, is injured, and vanishes completely without a trace, leaving only a jacket behind. Years later, the warehouse still stands, its windows boarded, its floors empty. Occasional trespassers speak of hearing footsteps echo across the concrete halls, voices whispering in the night, and glimpses of a man who is never there. David Herrera's fate remains a chilling puzzle, a case that challenges logic and leaves more questions than answers. In a city of millions, he disappeared as if the world had simply swallowed him whole, leaving nothing behind but the faint memory of a jacket and a vanished life. The disappearance at the deserted Motel Nevada, 1999. The desert stretches endlessly, an ocean of sand and rock under a blistering sun and cold, star-strewn nights. On August 12th, travelers reported a lone vehicle parked outside a small, run-down motel along Route 50, a spot locals referred to as the loneliest road in America. By the time authorities arrived, the motel appeared abandoned, yet inside one of the rooms was the last evidence of a young woman who had vanished without trace. The missing person was identified as Samantha Green, 23, a graduate student from Reno who had been traveling alone to a research conference in Las Vegas. She had checked into room 7 at the motel the previous evening, paid in cash, and requested a quiet room near the back. Surveillance footage from nearby gas stations captured her stopping to refuel, smiling at the clerk, then driving the last stretch along the empty highway before arriving at the motel. After that, she was never seen leaving. Motel staff recalled hearing nothing unusual that night. No arguments, no noises. The next morning, housekeeping knocked on her door with no response. When they finally entered, they found the room intact, her suitcase unpacked, her laptop open, and a half-finished notebook on the desk. But Samantha herself was gone. There were no signs of struggle, no forced entry, no fingerprints besides. Hers, the window was locked, the door was secured. It was as if she had simply vanished from the room. The police arrived quickly and conducted a full sweep of the motel and surrounding area. They found no tracks in the sand outside the back door, no tire marks indicating a vehicle had left after her arrival, and no evidence that anyone else had been in the room. Her car remained in the parking lot, keys in the ignition untouched. All personal items, including cash, credit cards, and identification, were still present. Nothing suggested robbery, foul play, or voluntary disappearance. Investigators interviewed nearby travelers, gas station clerks, and anyone who might have seen Samantha along the highway. Witnesses reported seeing her walk confidently into the motel at 9:47 p.m., but no one saw her leave. The highway was sparsely traveled that night, and no other vehicles were recorded entering the motel parking lot. Cameras along Route 50 confirmed her arrival but captured no unusual activity afterward. Search teams scoured the desert, mile after mile, but found nothing. Dogs tracked scents into the sand and rocks, but all trails went cold almost immediately. Even the nearby dry washes, crevices, and abandoned buildings offered no clues. The desert, vast and open, seemed to have swallowed her whole. Forensic analysis of the motel room revealed no signs of forced entry or struggle. Samantha's personal items were undisturbed, suggesting she had left voluntarily, but every other piece of evidence contradicted that. The notebook on her desk contained routine notes for her conference. No messages, no hidden clues. The laptop showed only browser history and unfinished essays. It was a normal room, normal belongings, normal life, except she was missing. Authorities considered every theory: abduction by an opportunistic criminal, voluntary disappearance, even accidental death in the surrounding desert. But nothing fit. There were no witnesses to a crime, no ransom notes, no reports of suspicious vehicles in the area. No family or friends reported threats. And despite exhaustive searches, the desert offered no trace of her. The case became national news. Tabloids speculated wildly about the lonely road, mysterious forces, or even supernatural involvement. Skeptics suggested she had staged her disappearance to escape obligations or start a new life. But family and friends insisted Samantha would never do such a thing. She had been meticulous, ambitious, and unlikely to vanish without leaving some indication. Years passed. The motel changed hands multiple times, falling further into disrepair. But the story of Samantha Green persisted. Travelers along Route 50 report seeing strange lights near the abandoned building at night, shadows moving across the desert floor, and, occasionally, a lone figure near the lot that disappears when approached. Some say it is Samantha, wandering, lost between worlds. Others refuse to stop and look, unnerved by the legend that clings to the empty rooms and cracked pavement. The official police record remains hauntingly simple: victim, Samantha Green. Incident, disappearance. Location, deserted motel, Route 50, Nevada. Suspect, unknown. Behind that line lies one of America's most perplexing unsolved cases: a woman who checked into a motel, left no evidence of struggle, and simply vanished, leaving a room perfectly intact and a dessert that refuses to give her back. Decades later, the room remains empty, the keys to the front door rusting, the sand drifting against the edges of the parking lot. Travelers tell stories to keep the memory alive, whispering about the lonely motel where the desert swallowed a young woman whole, leaving only questions, speculation, and a chilling reminder of how easily a person can disappear when no one is watching. For those who follow the story, Samantha Green is not just a missing person. She is the embodiment of unsolved mysteries, a symbol of the impossible, and a reminder that some disappearances are so complete, so absolute, that they leave the world forever changed, yet untouched.
Thank you for following.